Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, Andrew Dukowitz of Zone Coverage joins to talk about the Timberwolves. We'll talk about the matchup against the Lakers tonight. We also talk a little bit about an article he wrote recently for Zone Coverage about the Timberwolves offense and how their defense is impacting their offense and the lack of passing within their offense. We'll break the whole thing down, talk about his view on the Wolves' week of practice leading into the Lakers game as well. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by Robinhood Gold. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend and happy Timberwolves game day. The Wolves have not played since Sunday night in Golden State. It's been a week and a long week. Ready for some Wolves action this evening back at Target Center as well. Looking to start another win streak after their last one was snapped on Sunday. Today on the show, going to have Andrew Dukowitz from Zone Coverage on. We'll talk about a variety of topics. We'll get into that very quickly here off the top. But quickly, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And a reminder about the daily Locked On Wolves newsletter. You can sign up at lockedondaily.com. It's one stop for all things Wolves. There's some great national articles on there as well. You'll get one every day, Monday through Friday. Be sure to subscribe at lockedondaily.com. All right, Andrew and I start. We talk a bit about the Wolves, their defensive issues kind of leading into some of the offensive issues, the lack of passing, the low assist rate the Wolves have. He talks about the correlation between games where they don't pass enough or games that they lose. And he talked about Jaden McDaniels' thoughts on that same topic. And then we get into a bit of like, could we expect anything different rotation-wise? What does this layoff of 4 days at home do for Minnesota leading into Friday's game against the Lakers? We'll talk about that matchup too. So without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Andrew Dukowitz of Zone Coverage. All right, as promised, welcoming in Andrew Dukowitz, the Timberwolves beat reporter over at Zone Coverage. And Andrew, appreciate you joining me. We're going to talk a little bit about the Lakers matchup for the game tonight. The Wolves haven't played since Sunday, so a lot to get to there. And of course, just played the Lakers a couple of weeks ago. So we'll talk about what to expect in tonight's game. We'll get to that in a little bit. But first, I wanted to get into, you wrote an article for Zone Coverage a few days ago regarding the Timberwolves passing and how their assist rate as a team, basically all the assist numbers, related numbers, peripheral assist numbers are down this season. And Chris Finch spoke a little bit about that to the media and talked a little bit about how, that matters less than winning games, which is true. But obviously, any coach would tell you that they want to have a higher percentage of their shots assisted than unassisted. And with the way the Wolves play, it's maybe not surprising that they have, such a low overall assist rate as a team between Julius, Randle, Anthony Edwards. They've got guys that play a lot of isolation ball and are good at it too. What stuck out to you the most when researching this article related to the Wolves' lack of passing? And was there anything in the numbers or in you studying this that concerned you the most about the Timberwolves' overall lack of passes as an offense?
Yeah, well, first, Ben, I just want to say thanks for having me on. Been listening to you since pretty much the pandemic. Love everything you do here on Locked On. It's awesome to get to meet you. I guess as far as like researching for the article, the thing that sticks out for me the most is in wins. So when the Timberwolves win ball games, they have a 68.2% assist percentage, which means nearly 7 out of every 10 makes that they have comes off of an assist. In losses, their assist percentage drops to 58.1%. So pretty much a full 10% drop. You can say, well, they must be missing shots in losses. That has to be the reason. But actually, their field goal percentage only dips by like 4% from wins to losses. So it's really the Wolves win ball games when they're passing and spreading the ball around. I actually got the chance to talk to Jaden McDaniels today and asked him a little bit about it. And he pretty much confirmed that. saying, when you're spreading the ball around, when guys are getting to touch the ball, get open looks, it motivates them to go back and play hard on defense. And that's kind of the correlation I found in my article, was just their defensive rating also goes up 10 points in wins, nearly the identical 10% increase. And it just kind of meets the eye test too, of when they lose, it seems like they lose, bad all around. And when they win, it seems like the defense is doing really well. The offense is doing really well. I know you've talked on here a couple times about the pace of the Wolves kind of being an issue. That still across the board is an issue. Even in their wins, their offensive rating is in the bottom 10 in the league. It's a correlation between the defense and the passing, but other than that, the offense still really struggles in general.
Yeah. Overall, the Timberwolves offense is currently on cleaning the glass. They're 17th league wide, and they were up to about 15th, 14th, maybe before the losing streak, and now not having played in about a week. But the transition offense piece of it, which you're right, I've talked a lot about it. And again, it's related to what you wrote about in your article this week. They're 29th in the league in frequency in terms of how often they run in transition. And we're getting a little bit closer to where they were last year in terms of their success. It was something last season, the Wolves didn't run enough, but when they did, they actually had a pretty good transition offense. And this year they weren't running. And when they were running, it wasn't successful for a little while. And then over this winning streak that the Wolves just ended on Sunday, we saw them have some success in transitions, get some fast break points against some of these other opponents. And so now they're 29th in frequency. They're 9th in points per play. They're still dead last in running off of rebounds, which is something, Chris Finch has addressed this too. Like, there's no reason the Wolves shouldn't be running more off of defensive rebounds. Teams are running off of makes against the Wolves, which is, related, but a different conversation, their transition defense. I think overall, the frequency of transition needs to happen more often, the frequency of pushing the ball in transition, which is going to lead to more assists. And like you said, it's going to encourage them to play that much harder on the defensive end.
Exactly. I think the struggle with this team right now with running in transition is they started off the year really struggling on defensive rebounding. And when you have a team with Rudy Gobert, you shouldn't be struggling. But it was kind of the reality of, look at what Cat's doing in New York right now. He's pulling down nearly 12 rebounds a game. You lose that type of second anchor just rebounding wise, and the Wolves have had to kind of scramble, whether it's trying to get Nikhil to crash more or Jaden to crash more. Randle's kind of starting to figure out where his place is in like the box out schemes that they have. I do think as the season goes on, especially as Rob comes back and is presumably healthy tomorrow, that fast break number will increase a little bit, but also this just isn't a really fast pace of play team. When you have Mike Conley and you have Rudy Gobert, Randle, even when he rebounds and pushes, doesn't really do it quickly. It's just a team that I think this year, the ceiling for them is probably like 20th in pace, 20th in fast break efficiency versus, when you see the headline talent of Ant and even Jaden, who can get out there and run, you'd think they'd be a little bit higher. But I think it's just a personnel problem. And then how poorly they started rebounding, I think kind of spooked them a little.
Yeah. And I've always said, I think it's just about picking their spots. Like you're right. They're never going to be higher than the 20th or so in the league. I think last year they finished around 24th, 25th in pace. This year they're slightly higher, but not a lot. Because of, as you said, some of the personnel, and then also they don't want to get into a track meet because their defense is so good in the half court. Yeah. And their defense actually, like I mentioned, some of their weaknesses in transition defense. Overall, it's actually not too bad. It's still top 10 in the league, no matter where you look in terms of their defense in transition. But comparatively comparing it to their half court defense, it's not nearly as good. So they would prefer to set their defense. They would prefer to play a lower variance game, less possessions overall. But I think where Chris Finch gets frustrated is that they sometimes don't push the pace when they have the opportunity to push the pace. And, we'll see this, like Anthony Edwards would just as soon play it, unless he's getting a pick six or, is the recipient of a pass, in a wide, 2-on-1 or whatever. he would love to slow it down every time.
Yeah.
And that's, it's kind of funny. Like a lot of times that's what ends up happening in these kind of, they could be transition opportunities, but they hit the brakes instead of the gas. And if they just ran 1 or 2 more times a game and picked their spots correctly, like, I don't think anyone's asking this team to be the 7 seconds or less Suns. I think the best case scenario here is they just run a little bit more. They find some easy buckets. It could help their foul rate as a team, because the half court offense has had its moments this year where it's looked okay, but the end result is just a lot like last year because they're still not, picking those opportunities to get easy buckets.
100%. And again, it's just, you kind of hit the nail on it. They almost tend to just slow it down instead of push it. And that's why we're not seeing those Dante trailing threes off of like Brunson and Josh Hart this year. It's Dante, is just one example, but since he's the new guy on the team, he's really kind of had to alter how he plays in the fast break, where now he just kind of sets up like in his normal offense instead of sprinting to the corner or sprinting behind to the wing. And those are just easy opportunities that could really boost this team's offense. But again, the personnel, the fear of giving up those offensive rebounds. I also just wonder if maybe they're almost like nervous to get too fast, because then it might wind out like a Rudy or other players that are running back and forth in those transition opportunities. But I mean, theoretically, the team does have the depth too. I mean, Minot could easily keep getting 8 minutes a game of just sprinting up and down the court. And maybe that's the end goal that they're looking for. And it's just too early to tell, but you're, again, 100% right. Those opportunities are there. They just don't really take them a lot.
All right, next I want to get into the Lakers matchup, and we'll talk a little bit about if there's any benefit to the Wolves having the amount of time off that they've had this week in terms of practice, et cetera. You've been at practice this week. We could talk about that a little bit, and then talk about the Lakers matchup specifically. So we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY in uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. All right. So, Andrew, this week the Wolves have finally gotten a few days of practice in. It's actually kind of one of the, maybe it's I was going to say unintended benefit, but maybe it was an intentional benefit of the NBA Cup is that the teams that aren't actually playing in the semifinals, quarterfinals, whatever, the final 8 of the NBA Cup actually get some practice time in season that's not during the All-Star break. And this is obviously the first extended break the Wolves have had this year. I'd imagine they probably practiced 3 times between Sunday and the game tonight. So, being at practice this week, do you think there's any, is there any, I mean, there should certainly be benefit to them having these days, but is there any vibe around the team that suggests hey, anything's changed, or they're going to play differently or implement anything differently, or the rotation might change, or anything that you think this break could give the Wolves come Friday night?
I mean, the attitude from the team is completely different from when they left before that Clippers game. Before they beat it was the Clippers, the first win of that 4-game winning streak. Before they won that game, this team was kind of in a searching for answers type of space where it was like, hey, man, we don't know. People got to play harder. We got to see some more effort. I think Dante said, people have to start to want to defend, things like that were starting to come out, which to me sounds like they could be heading into a tailspin. They win those 4 games. They have that pretty solid, I don't know, I almost consider it a scheduled loss, the last game on that long West Coast road trip to Golden State. And the vibe's just been so much better. I mean, Nikhil came out, I think it was on Wednesday, and was talking about just how they've found their identity again. People are playing for each other. Jaden came out today and said he doesn't know what happened the first few games of the season, but he feels locked in defensively again. It's just even Finch's kind of a little bit lighter. The benefit of having these practices, though, is Julius and Dante are still relatively new to this team.
Yep.
And as just about every player that has come through here has mentioned, Rudy Gobert is just kind of a difficult player to get used to when you first get here. Ant had that struggle. Kat's had that struggle. Nas has spoken about it before. And I think just the more practice time you can get with Randle playing alongside Rudy, where there isn't pressure, there isn't, stats being counted, is just a good thing. I think the other benefit of it is just people are able to stay like in their own homes and like just kind of chill for a few days, which again, not that coming home to a -2-degree day in Minnesota is great compared to LA, but a lot of guys were talking about just how nice it was to like get home to their families and be comfortable. So I think it does help quite a bit when you have these extended times.
Yeah, your point about playing with Rudy is an interesting one. And I think it's easy to lose sight of it. And I'm a big, I often talk about like it's so easy to be a prisoner of the moment and to give into recency bias. And we're still only a quarter of the way through the season, but like some of the reactions and frankly overreactions to some of the stuff early in the season, now certainly concerning. Like they lost 7 of 9, they went to the conference finals last year. Like they should be playing better, yes. But it's easy to just kind of be like, it's anytime a move like the Randle Cat trade happens, it's like there's this immediate like, I can't believe they did this, and then actually, everybody convinces themselves that this is going to work great because he's just another all-star and he can play the cat role. And then in reality, of course, it's somewhere in between where this might work out okay, but it probably was never going to work out in the first 20 games exactly the way that they expect it to work out over the course of the entire season. And the Rudy Gobert thing took a full season. Now I know the roster changed a little. It wasn't, exactly that, but like that was a big piece of it. I know Cat was out a bunch too, but like it took a minute for Kyle Anderson and D'Lo and Rudy never figured it out together. And that's part of the reason Mike Conley's in Minnesota. So I think that's a great point. And I spent some time on his Thursday show talking about the big man rotations and how Rudy and Randle together have been good. Like they've been fine. Nowhere near as good as any of the big man pairings last year. And not as good as Rudy and Nas this year, but Rudy and Nas have played together now for a couple of seasons, 2+ seasons. And Nas and Randle like that's also Randle and Nas acclimating to one another too when they played together. But I think that piece specific to Rudy, and also, to what end is that potentially impacting Dante DiVincenzo, right? Like, it was a completely surprising change of scenery for him, and his role shifted from starter and like, hey, you're basically our second option most nights in New York to, you're the sixth man, but you're not the sixth man because we actually have the sixth man of the year on the roster already. So you're kind of like the 7th or 8th guy, and we just need you to hit threes. And he still hasn't looked comfortable. And his minutes with Rudy, like I just pulled it up, and their minutes together are fine. But I mean, the offense isn't. Like Rudy and Dante DiVincenzo in lineups with the two of them on the court, it's just a 20th percentile offense. And they turn it over quite a bit. It's just not, it hasn't been smooth. The Dante Rudy pick and roll has not been smooth. We've seen Dante throw several lobs that are turnovers that never hit the mark to Rudy. So yeah, I mean, that I think is pretty interesting to see if that's something the Wolves were able to kind of smooth over a little bit over the course of the week. But I think it's easy to overlook and shame on us for doing so, how big of a deal it is to change out 2 of your top 8 guys essentially on the eve of training camp.
And Dante, I think the other issue he's having is when he's in the game, Mike Conley isn't in the game, and the Wolves are trusting him and Nikhil to be the backup point guards, which neither of them are true backup point guards. And there is something, to be said about just having a Mike Conley. Hopefully Rob Dillingham keeps developing into that, but you're putting Dante in a position that he's never really had to play. you're putting him with new personnel, including like a Rudy, who's a little difficult to learn where he likes the ball and what spots he likes it in. And then where I notice it most is always on defense. And Finch spoke about it a couple times earlier in the year about just Rudy Gobert playing with more hesitancy than he's played in the last couple seasons. So I kind of look back on like, what does that mean? So I went back to the tape, and I mean, sure enough, there's kind of like pick and rolls where Dante is supposed to maybe switch onto the pick or lean in more or pick up the roll man so Rudy can step up. And Dante is just not familiar enough with their defense yet. And it leaves Rudy in this no man's land. And it all kind of connects. And when you're having that trust issue on defense of, is this guy going to roll to the big so that I don't get dunked on, or is he going to step in? That kind of converts to the offensive side too, where now you're kind of sitting there like, is he going to see me? Is he going to pass it to me? Which none of this is on Dante. I want to be clear about that. This is just you have been plopped in 3 days before training camp, have to learn an entire new offense, an entire new defense. The only guy on the team you know is Randle, who is also doing that. And good luck. The season starts in a week. I think it's getting better. And I think in that 4-game winning streak, it was working probably about as good as it's going to. But this team at the 40, 50 game mark is going to look a lot more sharp than they do now.
Let's talk Wolves Lakers here in just a moment. I want to talk about the matchup. The Wolves obviously blew the Lakers out a couple weeks ago, but we'll talk about what to expect in this game and what might look a little bit different. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Timberwolves game Friday night against the Lakers. We'll talk about this in a moment, but we do know LeBron James is reportedly going to be out on Friday night. The Wolves are favored by 8.5 points at home against the Lakers. We'll talk through the rest of the injury report and what we might be able to expect there in just a moment. Maybe not a surprising line. It's a big line regardless. Actually, I kind of expected it to be a little bit higher with the LeBron news. But anyway, Wolves minus 8.5 at home against the Lakers on Friday night. Both teams haven't played since Sunday, so no rest advantage there either. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so Andrew, let's talk a little bit of Wolves-Lakers. Wolves-Lakers played, I think it was almost, it might have been exactly 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, is that right? I think that's right.
I think that's how long it's been.
Yeah,
it's winter now. Everything's a blur.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess it would have been before the road trip. So, and they haven't played all week. So yeah, 2 weeks ago. And at the time, the Wolves were trying to get back to 500. They ended up blowing out the Lakers by 29. LeBron looked, honestly, unfortunately, as old as I've ever seen LeBron look. Had a really difficult game. The Lakers really only got offense from D'Lo in this one and only managed 80 points. The Wolves turned over the Lakers like 21 times in this game. And I mean, Minnesota, like nobody played in the fourth quarter. Ant didn't even have a good game. He had 8 points on 13 shots. Rudy was great in this one. This was during a stretch of really strong Rudy Gobert games. And I think the first or second game in a stretch of 4 opponents held under 93 points by the Wolves. They got big games off the bench from all the bench guys. Nas, Nikhil, even DiVincenzo had a solid game, 9 assists, no turnovers in that game. And then, of course, you go all the way back to opening night. The Wolves lost to the Lakers. That one felt a bit fluky. Opening nights often are. Like Julius Randle never looked comfortable. It was just a weird game. And honestly, I don't know that the opening night game tells us a whole lot. In terms of injuries, real quickly, LeBron, we know, is out. Austin Reeves is officially day-to-day. I guess he hasn't practiced this week is what I'm seeing, but there's a chance he plays Friday. Other than that, Jackson Hayes has been out. We know Jared Vanderbilt's been out. I don't think there's anything else major on the injury front. I mean, Anthony Davis is always a little bit a little bit questionable, but I think he's supposed to play. So what hits you, right off the bat? Either it could be related to the game 2 weeks ago or completely different, or I mean, what hits you first when you think about a Wolves-Lakers matchup on Friday night?
I mean, I think it should follow the same course as the game 2 weeks ago. This should be a game that the Wolves can jump out in front of. I think, in your ad read, excellently done. The line probably would be higher if the Wolves didn't have a few of those games where they fell down to their competition's level. I mean, Anthony Davis typically does really well against the Wolves. So whatever his points is, take the over. That would be my advice, because he normally does cook us. But they, Reeves, if he hasn't been practicing, LeBron's out. D'Lo is kind of hit or miss, especially against the Wolves, but really kind of his whole career. I would anticipate it's going to follow the same lines, where the Wolves are going to be able to get up to a big lead. Again, the vibes are good. They're feeling really confident about their defense. If Reeves and Gobert is out, that leaves them really with just D'Lo and Davis as their scorers. And I just think the Wolves are looking for another blowout. I think, the best way to get these young guys on the rotation playing time is to just blow teams out and give them 10 minutes in the fourth.
Yeah, and the Lakers, I mean, it is actually overall a pretty good matchup for Minnesota. Obviously, especially with a shorthanded Lakers team, but even if they weren't shorthanded, I mean, the Lakers, they're like dead last in transition defense. So when the Wolves do run, feels like they could get some easy buckets against this Lakers team. Offensively, they don't shoot that many threes, which I think surprises people, or at least surprises me based on what I expected this year from the Lakers. They don't shoot that many threes. Really, their whole offense is getting to the free throw line. And we've even seen that happen less frequently over the past couple of weeks as they've continued to struggle. They're not getting as many whistles. LeBron hasn't looked like himself and has been shooting and missing a lot of threes and not getting to the line as much. Just overall as a team, like there isn't a whole lot to write home about for them offensively. And I actually think the Wolves matchup. And also they're not a good offensive rebounding team, which is another one of the Wolves. I don't want to say another, like they have a ton of Achilles heels defensively, but that's maybe their clearest one over the past couple of years, is they occasionally have these games where they have issues with defensive rebounding. Lakers are a bad rebounding team. They're a mediocre shooting team. Really, they shouldn't be. I mean, what are they currently? They're 13-11, and their Pythagorean win-loss is 9-15, because they've won a lot of close games, and frankly, they're not a 500 team, especially without LeBron, and especially if Austin Reeves doesn't play. It feels like this is a matchup that, as you said, that the Wolves should feel pretty comfortable with, as long as they, defend without fouling to an extent. They defensive rebound the ball well enough in this game. It feels like a matchup the Wolves should hopefully have a multiple possession win, and we'll get some garbage time. You mentioned, I think, toward the beginning of our conversation, that Rob Dillingham has been practicing, and it looks like he may be available Friday. Any sense on, is there a chance he has an opportunity to get some rotation minutes on Friday night?
I hope so. I mean, being around practice, people that follow me on Twitter or X, I tend to post like who's working in the gym last when the media people come in, and that kid is in there. I mean, I've been to every home practice except for one. He's been there every single day I'm there, working until I leave with Pablo Prigioni. The kid puts in so much work. Just on a human level, I hope he gets the opportunity when he comes back on Friday. I know Finch spoke pretty highly of him on Wednesday, just kind of saying that he's gotten really comfortable with a couple sets and feels pretty comfortable offensively. I think it's now the tough part of Josh Minott has also been playing really good over this 5-game stretch, which they had really high hopes for him before the season too. I do think this is probably the time of the year where they can start experimenting with a 9th or 10th rotation spot. Prior to this, there was a lot of talk about we want to get the top 8 guys gelled together and kind of locked in. I think they're starting to see that. So I wouldn't be surprised, I guess, if they do start sprinkling in a little bit more extra time. But just based off of like how Rob's been working and how he played before the injury, I would really hope he gets at least 10 minutes or so just to kind of run that second offensive unit.
Yeah, it's interesting because this time of year, like you said, I mean, you'd like to think that they would start working some more guys in, and um, on the one hand, like, yeah, you're a quarter of the way through the season. You got to kind of get a sense for what you have with Minot and Dillingham. And like, obviously Joe Ingles has been hurt, but like, he hasn't been in the rotation since the first couple of weeks. We haven't seen Terrence Shannon get any rotation minutes this year. But then you look at the schedule, and it's actually really hard. Like, outside of the Spurs game, which obviously isn't easy on Sunday, it's like all playoff teams until you get to Detroit on January 4th. And you've got, Dallas on Christmas Day. You've got another Golden State game. You got the Knicks next week. You got the Thunder. You got Houston. You got Boston. All these teams between now and January 4th. And there's actually the other argument for not dipping into the depth even more is that there's no back-to-backs on the schedule until you get to January 6th and 7th. So we're 3 weeks away from a back-to-back that just had 4 days off. So on the one hand, yeah, maybe they get more practice, to get these guys acclimated, but Finch may not need it, right? Like, he may feel like, I can ride some of these rotation guys a bit more because we have so much rest. Now, obviously, as I've said on the show many times early this season, like, eventually those guys are going to wear down. We saw it in the playoffs with Mike Conley, and I mean, we saw it with Ant really in the conference finals. Like, he was clearly gassed at that point. So it'll be interesting to see how Finch handles the next few weeks. All right. That's all we got for you today on the show here. And Andrew, you can find his stuff over at Zone Coverage. You can follow Andrew on X. You can see, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see it right there on the screen. His Twitter handle, or X handle, is at @aduke, Dukemn. So be sure to give him a follow. Check out his coverage over at Zone Coverage. Anything else you want to promote, or any final words? We won't call them last words. Any final words, Andrew?
I mean, it's just good to see them playing a little bit better. This team has so much talent on it. When the sky was falling about 2 weeks ago, it was really tough to see that vibe in the building. So it's nice to see them winning, because, man, they have a lot of talent. They really should be winning a lot more games.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like, they're, hopefully this is the case, that they're, that they're laying in the weeds, and that there's, people talking about West contenders. And again, we're only a quarter of the way through the season. People aren't talking about the Wolves right now. Obviously the West is stacked. I get it, but we'll see how things shake out here, and we'll get a much better sense after this really tough next few weeks. All right, Andrew, it's been fun, and we'll definitely do it again soon. Appreciate you coming on.
Appreciate you, Ben.
All right, there you have it. My conversation with Andrew Dukowitz of Zone Coverage. Andrew does a great job covering the Wolves. Make sure to go give him a follow on X, and we'll definitely have him on again to talk Wolves here at some point over the next several weeks. Of course, Wolves play tonight. We'll have the postcast over at Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube, and then that audio will live right here on this channel, Locked On Wolves. And I'll be back on Monday. We'll talk about the weekend. The Wolves have the Lakers tonight. They have the Spurs on Sunday. So we'll talk about that Spurs game. The post-game pod will be coming up Monday right here on Locked On Wolves. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And reminder, sign up for the Locked On Wolves daily newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.